Hi everyone. Let's hope the technology works. I'm live right now and have this huge light in my face, but otherwise you can't see me. So if you've been watching the channel, you'll know that I've been covering life here in Italy, and particularly what you need to do, what you need to know to live here on a continuing basis as a permanent resident, and perhaps what's become challenging for many people. So let's get right to it because we have a lot to cover. If you're joining us tonight, I sent out the notice just a few minutes ago because I'm never quite sure between all the things I'm doing when I will have this lovely free space of an hour to update you. So if you're joining us, please leave your name down in the chat, maybe your name and your country that you're joining us from. And you're very welcome. And if you would like a comment, and particularly if you'd like to get an answer to a question, I would prefer that you leave me a comment down there after the stream. You can watch this immediately. There's an immediate playback if you can't watch it live and join us. You can watch it back on there. So leave your questions and comments down in. I'm always very happy to get a comment, whether it's a question or just to say I enjoyed the video, nice to see you again, whatever it is. Comments help the channel enormously. Many people don't know this. And the likes are crucial. So you can like this right now. Go on, hit that like button. I can see it right there. You can hit the like button anytime. And if you want this information and you've watched some of my former videos, please subscribe. It helps the channel a lot. I generally forget to ask people to subscribe, but without subscription and without likes and comments, this video will never be suggested by YouTube, and therefore you won't be able to find it. So if you're wondering, I need this information, I'm living in Italy after Brexit, I'm not Italian, and I want to know my rights, and I want to know how other people are getting on. This channel exists, but it won't be suggested to you unless you subscribe. And if you would like to like the video, that increases the chances of the video being suggested. Okay, lovely. So now that we've done with that, if you'd like to just like it, and if you want to send a heart or something in the chat, you can do that too. But let's get right to it because there's a lot to cover, as always. So welcome back, all of you who've joined me before to the series I'm doing on life as an expat in Italy or life as an immigrant to Italy. And what we can expect after Brexit is our subject tonight. So last week's video, I do need to say that these lives usually go out on a Sunday night. I found that in the past to be the best time for people to be available. But as it turns out, this past Sunday, yesterday, in other words, I wasn't available, so I'm doing it today. So I hope you can join us. And if you can't join us, you can watch it back immediately and tell me what you thought. So last week, I covered things that make people leave Italy, why people are leaving Italy. Many of these people fell in love with Italy, have lived in Italy, and found that things unraveled in a way they hadn't expected. It was either the bureaucracy, perhaps the schooling, a thing I will cover in upcoming editions. Schooling is something that causes a lot of people angst in terms of the different levels coming from different countries. Another reason could be buying a house and not realizing that doesn't give you access to residence automatically. There are lots of reasons people leave Italy where once they thought, oh, wow, this is my forever place. So let's cover one of these tonight. So tonight we're specifically looking at Brexit. That doesn't mean you American viewers, and I have lots of Canadians and Americans who join me, should switch off because it affects everybody. But we are specifically digging down on Brexit tonight because it's been requested of me for some time. So lovely. And by the way, share it with your friends because they might have the same questions. You'll get the link once it's published. You can just click on share and share the link. You can share it on Facebook or wherever you want to share it. So Brexit. So Brexit happened despite everybody believing it would never happen because it was so against everything that encompassed Europe and being so inclusive and the wonderfulness of Europe. And how could how could anybody vote for Brexit? And despite all the groups and all the people protesting and gathering together to try and block it, it went through, needless to say. So once the referendum had happened, I already had some doubts about how things would pan out in the next years in Italy. I came to Italy long before Brexit was ever dreamt of. Precisely in 2002, which was another world. Even Italy has changed phenomenally in 20 years. I think most countries have changed phenomenally in the last 20 years. And anyway, so that's been my experience in Italy. And in that time, I've helped and assisted and been a friend to many people who've been through incredible stress, getting their ducks in a row in Italy. Some have left. I would say most have left. A few have stayed. And yes, it's always a challenge. And that is the reason I decided to start these podcasts or vlogs, whatever you want to call them, to talk about exactly what is going on in terms of your rights and how things pan out regarding your rights as a permanent resident here in Italy. Okay, so we know all the lovely stories about Italy. I've lived in the Dolce Vita, having a lovely cappuccino and a beautiful piazza, the beautiful churches, the art. I am subject to all of that. I fell in love with all of that. I'm no different from anybody else in that I fell under Italy's spell 100%. And really, right in the beginning, I remember in the town of Lucca, which a lot of you will be familiar with in Tuscany, my Italian friends, my very new Italian friends, said to me, whatever you do, do not, I repeat, do not register. Just come here on holiday, don't register, because your life will become a nightmare from there on. And I thought they were just exaggerating. I thought, how bad can it be? I mean, gosh, I've moved a few times, so I'm sure it's not going to be so bad. Needless to say, I ignored every piece of information they gave me, as we do, because we want to live it our way. We want to experience things our way. And when people offer us advice unsolicited or asked for, we tend to say, well, I'll just see how it goes myself. And so it was with me. That's exactly what I did. So, but every single thing that they told me then, and that was a long time ago, 2 decades ago, more than 2 decades ago this year, has come true. It was completely true. I mean, they should know. They've lived here since birth. And even though they had never had the experience of living in another country and experiencing another country as a resident, they knew how difficult Italian life and the pieces of paper you need are. And that's the price we pay for living the La Dolce Vita. That is the price. And there is always a price for everything. So let's get back to Brexit. So fast forward quite a few years, the referendum happened, Brexit happened, despite everybody petitioning the government, petitioning the European Union, whatever. It happened, okay? I just realized I forgot to put earrings on tonight. I'm almost never with earrings. I feel completely naked. I feel like I should cover my ears, but maybe not. Maybe it's quite cold this evening, so maybe my little soft scarf will cover my ears anyway. There we are. I have naked ears. So yes, so that happened. And from the moment it happened, people were asking the inevitable questions. What's going to happen to us? Will we be able to stay on in Italy? Will any of our conditions, because remember, and I'm specifically talking of UK here because we're talking of Brexit, obviously, um, when people were living here in Italy from UK on British passports, they were part of the European Union, no different from a German person, a French person, a Spanish person, or theoretically an Italian person who was, yes, a citizen of Italy, but also part of the European Union. When Brexit was formally ratified and everything went through, Article 51 specifically said that the people who had been resident before the date it happened would be covered by the settlement program. So in other words, if you were already settled in Italy, what does it mean settled? And here is where we get to the nitty-gritty. Settled means you were already a permanent resident, you were registered as a resident in Italy, and as I covered in my last video, which I'll hook up there, so that you can, if you haven't watched it already, you need to watch that one first and then come back to this one. If you already settled in Italy, what does settled mean? It means that you were registered in the comune in which you live as a resident, and therefore you had a document stating you were a resident and the date at which you became a resident there. So let's say it was 10 years before Brexit happened. It would state that you have been a resident. It's called the Residenza Storica, your history of your residence, in one comune, or I don't know if you moved maybe 5 communes. In my case, luckily, it was one commune that I had lived in. The commune is kind of the most similar thing I can say is like the town hall, the municipality, where you register, where you pay your rates, where you pay, where you register births and marriages, all that kind of stuff. Okay, so if you were here already registered and living, you fell under the special residents that were already settled before Brexit happened. Once that all went through, and we had a year or two of warnings, if you came to Italy after Brexit had already gone through and Article 51 had already been activated, you then fell under those that came after Brexit. And therefore, you are not covered by the settlement, which said that automatically you were a permanent resident. And if you wanted in the future and you met all the specifications, there's a long list. You can watch one of the video before, as to what you needed to become a citizen. You could live for 10 years, or if you were a European Union person, it was 4 years then. And after 4 years, if everything was in order and you had your police report and all of that lovely stuff, and you were eligible, this is not a citizenship post, so I won't go into that. You could apply and get your Italian citizenship. And many people did that. Okay, other people said, no, I don't need to do this. I've never needed 2 passports. Happy with my British passport, my lovely burgundy passport that says that I'm part of the European Union. I don't need to change anything. And perhaps I don't want to change anything because I don't want to have to get police reports for the 6 countries I've lived in or whatever. And I don't particularly want to apply for citizenship in Italy immediately. And so that person would automatically have fallen into one of 2 camps, either before Article 51 was activated or after. And if you were after, you fall under the rest of the world now. So you're not part of the European Union anymore and are treated as a third national, as they call them, third country, in other words, not in the European Union. And you're under a whole new obligation. If you want to come and live in Italy, you have to have a reason and a visa, as it turns out now. And I'll get to the visa. You have to have a visa to come and be permanent resident in Italy. If you're joining us, why don't you just put your name in the chat and where you're joining us from? I always enjoy knowing who's joining us. You're most welcome. My name's Amanda. And so if you whatever one of these camps you fell into, that would state that you either had these rights in terms of Italian law or those rights in terms of, out of the European Union. And if you want to come and reside here, you have to apply for a visa because you no longer have automatic right to live here. So that's the foundation we're working on. So let's say you were one of the people who were already here. Okay, you were settled, and we had various instructions on what to do. And this is what most of these people, including me, did. Okay, because at that stage, I was a European Union person living who was already settled here before Brexit was activated. So what did we have to do? We had to go to the comune, the town hall, and get a piece of paper called the attestazione di residenza. So that meant that the comune was attesting, in other words, verifying, stating on a legal piece of paper with two beautiful stamps on it, bolli as they called in Italy. You always have to buy them. They cost €16, and you buy them from the tabacchi, the tobacco shop. Used to be the tobacco shop. Now it's basically what we call a kind of cafe where you have a coffee, you buy a newspaper, etc. Anyway, so what happened was, because I was in the camp of already resident, we got this attestazione, and that was our piece of paper that guaranteed that whatever rights we were enjoying as a European Union person pre-Brexit, we would continue to enjoy. What are those rights? Let's go through them quickly. Access to healthcare, state healthcare, obviously. You can always elect to go private if you wish, but generally there is no need, or at least there wasn't then. And that you would be able to live here under the same conditions that you lived as a European Union member, a European Union citizen, even though they were now out. So there were quite a few of us. I mean, nobody knows the exact number, but there are a lot of Britons living in Italy. And at that stage, perhaps even more than they are now, to be quite honest, because people could sort of jump from one to the other because, there was no firm proof that when you were in Italy, when you were in England. As it turned out, you have to register for residence, so you need your house, you need a contract for the house. If you're renting it, if you're buying it, you need to have the titles and the address. And to get residence, the vigili, who's the local police, will come and check that you live at that address, because this is a question that comes out. How did they know you were living there? Well, to get residence, it just doesn't happen incidentally. You have to testify that you're living in such an address, and 3 days or 4 days or maybe a week later, the vigili comes along, rings your bell. That's why you have to have your name on the buzzer. Whether or not it's a house, an independent house or an apartment in that building, your name must be on the buzzer, and checks that you live there. He comes in, checks that you live there, asks how many rooms, and checks who's living there. If it's you, if it's your whole family, that will be written on a document, taken back to the town hall, and so your residence starts. So that's how it works in Italy. I know it doesn't work this way in other countries, but that's how it works in Italy. Okay, so that's all happened. So now you have this beautiful piece of paper as a person who was here before Brexit to state that you have lived in Italy from such and such a date and are still living in Italy and are a resident. Okay, and we held on to these pieces of paper tightly with our lives. We fought for them. Some comunes didn't know what they were supposed to issue because, like often happens in Italy, they send out a directive and half of them didn't read it. So some of the smaller comunes and even some of the bigger ones in the big cities said, we have no clue what you're asking for. We don't know how to produce this piece of paper. And so many people had to really beg and plead for some advice, what to do, who to contact. And so many of the Facebook groups that exist today for Brexit rights, after Brexit, for British rights after Brexit, existed because there was this confusion. How do you get it? What do you do if the Comuna doesn't know what to give you? So on we rolled with these pieces of paper, and not long after, there were the first chirpings, the first sounds of this electronic card, which was not a carta, which was not a permesso di soggiorno, as non-European Union people had to get and have always had to get to live in Italy. So if you were coming from outside of Europe, you would get a permesso di soggiorno. It would be initially for 1 year, and then you could extend it, etc. And if you had lived here long enough, you could perhaps also apply for Italian citizenship, but you were a third country. Okay. But for those of us who were part of the European Union and now weren't part of the European Union, somehow Italy had to put us all on a system, an electronic system, a digital system. And so this card was spoken about. And when it first emerged, it was said to not be obligatory. So it is the carta soggiorno as opposed to the permesso di soggiorno, which everybody else that isn't ex-European Union had to get, and has always had to get, and still has to get. But anyway, so the Carta Sojourner was born. And initially, all the rumors were, and the talk wasn't obligatory, pretty much a waste of time, pain in the neck to get, because the only way you could make an appointment to get this was to have what they call a SPID. And a SPID is your own personal electronic email that is secure between you for the government to deal with stuff. Okay. So I had already applied for my citizenship as soon as the first little whisper of the referendum of Brexit came, but I had to wait another 4.5 years to physically get it. But anyway, my citizenship application for Italian citizenship was already in because I saw the writing on the wall, and some people said to me, I think it's not necessary, blah, blah, blah. I did it anyway. So I thought, should I get this card? Because, I mean, my citizenship's going to turn up any day, and then I won't need it. Well, no, I did need it, as it turned out, because for all the talk that it wasn't obligatory, that you shouldn't be forced to get this Carta Soggiorno because you had an attestazione that you had been living in Italy before Brexit happened. No, what happened was you did really have to get it, because if you didn't get it, just about everything you had to do, soon as the word got around from one comune to the other, they would ask for it, of course. As soon as a new document emerged in Italy and people start to know about it, and sometimes it takes about a year for the word to get around, they all started asking for it. And as much as you would say, and many people did, I don't need it. Here's my attestazione that I was resident before Brexit, and I have all the rights, and I invoke all the rights of the European Union, blah, blah, blah. No, we need the card. Okay, so many people went home furious, and many messages were sent back and forth on Facebook groups. What are we supposed to do? Because they won't renew our Carta Sanitaria. So what is a Carta Sanitaria? Carta Sanitaria is another registration you have to do once you're a resident. You go to ASL. I'm pronouncing it like that, but it's ASL. And the abbreviation for the people who manage the whole health system in Italy. Okay, so they register you. With them, you choose your family doctor, and you can only do that if you are a resident and you have a piece of paper stating you're a resident from the comune. Okay, great. Everybody has to do this, not only people who were involved in Brexit, not only British people. Everybody needs to register at ASL when they first become resident. And of course, if you move comunes, you often have to go and see ASL again and recalibrate yourself in the new place. Okay, so what happened was ASL started to ask people for this carta soggiorno, and people were getting upset because they said, I don't need it. I've been living here already for 10 years or 20 years, could be 30 years. Before Brexit happened, I never needed anything. I was always fine. Here's my residence proof. Here's my residenza storico, blah, blah, blah. And they said, well, no, you actually do need the carta soggiorno. We need electronic proof. What was on that carta soggiorno that they needed was your fingerprints. So in other words, a complete identity trace. So everything that pertained to you, the first moment you arrived in Italy, your original permesso soggiorno, before they realized that Britain was part of the European Union. I had one of the old permessos right in the early days. Every piece of paper that pertained to you and could be connected, trace the dots, was on there. So, you know, your tax number, your codice fiscale, as they call it here, and your carta d'identità were all on this one card called a carta soggiorno. In other words, a card that allowed you to stay. Okay. So on this roll, there was huge debates. There were meetings held at the consulates, the British consulates in Milan and Rome. I went to a few of those where they said, you know, you don't need anything. Your rights are always invoked. Here's the article. Here's the thing. This article has been quoted a million times, sent around, whatever. At the end of the day, what it came down to, and certainly in 2023, and we're now in 2024, it's what everybody had to eventually say was, you do need it, because if you don't get it, your life is going to be made a complete misery. Your life's going to be made a complete misery. But here's the problem. To get this card, you need it. Not just your fingerprints, obviously. You needed your attestazione. So many people hadn't got it because they didn't hear about it. The time had been cut off already, and they said, why didn't you ask for it when Brexit first happened? Well, I didn't know. The usual thing. It's your responsibility, but lots of people didn't know. So they didn't have that attestazione. So they would go to the comune and say, I need that piece of paper. And they would say, we're not issuing them anymore. The time has elapsed. I'm sorry, it's over, you know. If you didn't get your piece of paper, we can give you a record of your residence here, but that wasn't enough because you didn't have the attestazione piece of paper. And so you needed that. You needed every single piece of paper. You also need proof that you were working and supporting yourself. And here comes the problem. So many people, particularly British people, had some kind of temporary contract to teach English or some kind of hours per week, 0-hour contracts, as they were called. I would say the majority of people had those because the schools could never get their head around the fact that they were going to give a permanent contract to a foreigner. So most people were working under the thinnest of rights on contracts that really weren't worth the paper they were written on. But hey, we all did what we had to do. And for schools, for state schools, even government schools, private language schools, they all gave out these co contracts that really didn't really give you a lot of rights. Once you left, you know, it was difficult to sign up for to become unemployed because the contract was kind of null and void. The contract was as long as that course lasted, and then it just elapsed. So anyway, one of the things that you needed to get the carta soggiorno was your proof that you were working, your earnings, this kind of stuff. So people went into a tailspin. People who'd been living here and maybe never earning. Okay, if you were married to an Italian, then you fell under them. So if it was your husband or wife, you were what they call carico. You were their carico. In other words, you were their responsibility, and therefore they had to provide this tax information as to whether you were paying into the system. Okay. And if you somehow were a little bit older and you'd been working as a teacher on these terrible contracts, and you were alone and you weren't working anymore and you were going through a difficult time, and perhaps your family were helping you with money here, there, and everywhere, or somehow you were surviving, but only just, you had a problem because you didn't have a work contract to take them. And so the inevitable question is, how are you able to live in Italy without sustenance? So this is when this card started to clash with the former rights that we had as European people. I was quite lucky in that I had already had to provide all my tax, all my back tax information for my citizenship. So I already had all these pieces of paper. They were all, my ducks were all in perfect rows. Thank goodness. And so, yeah, but so I discovered I needed it. I needed it. I needed it because it was required and people started to ask for it. And let me tell you, the first time I realized I needed it, I was flying out of Europe, going to South Africa to visit family when I through Germany. So in other words, I'm coming out of Italy on a British passport, okay, where I formerly was a European Union permanent resident. I'm not anymore a European Union resident. I am now a third country resident living in Italy. And the first thing the German people, who are more switched on than half of the Italian comune were, the first thing they asked me is, where's your carta soggiorno? And I said, oh, that's why I had to get it. And I whipped it out. Thank goodness. I had been through hell and high water to get it. But luckily, I had all my documents in a row. And I was lucky. I was one of the first ones. So I got an appointment. Now people are waiting 1 year, 2 years, goodness knows how long, just to get an appointment so they can present their documents to get a carta soggiorno. So this is a major problem. And I'm going to tell you how things played out in England for Italians and Europeans, because it's a seesaw here. There's two parts to this. There's that side and this side, and they should be complementary, but sometimes stuff falls through the cracks. And this is where people are finding themselves in Italy after Brexit with huge problems, and this is how it played out. So that was the first moment I realized, how was I going to prove that I lived in Italy before Brexit happened, that I had rights under Article 51? I was going to prove it with this card. I could have taken that piece of paper and explained it. They would have stamped my passport. Perhaps after the card, if they didn't really know what was going on, they would have stamped my passport anyway. And lots of people have had their passport stamped. But in the end, with all the chatting on Facebook and whatever, it was discovered that whether or not had the stamp in your passport, it didn't matter, because you do have rights in Italy, and if you needed to prove them, you could prove them. But needless to say, the first thing they said to me, where is your carta di soggiorno? Not your permesso, because that's not relevant to me. Your carta di soggiorno. And I whipped it out. And I learned from that moment on, when you're crossing the border to go out of the European Union to come back into Italy, you must present this carta before you even present your passport. So what you're saying to them is, I'm a permanent resident in Italy. Here's my card. It has everything. It has everything that your passport has and more. It's got your fingerprints, your whatever. Okay. So if they were looking for you, if you were a criminal and they were looking for you, that carta, you don't need that in your life, because you are happily existing in Italy, jumping between, all the European countries. It was great. You were covered. It was the borderless society. And as long as you stayed within there, yeah, it was fine. Anyway, they never knew which country you were in. And so they didn't know whether you'd been 2 years in Italy and then gone back to England. Nobody knew what was going on. And that was the whole point of Brexit, I think, was that Britain, wrongly or rightly, voted that they wanted control of their borders again. So they wanted to know who was in, who was out, who was gone, who was coming, who was whatever. And so this Carta Sojourner became essential. Now, what has emerged, and I'm going to cover a little bit further on what happened on the British side with Italians coming back to Italy or European Union people going back to their countries after Brexit, and what happened with the settled status in Britain while this was going on in Italy. Now, what has emerged recently, and I want to get to this because this is what everybody is so concerned about and everybody needs to know and everyone's discussing. And the reason I'm doing these things so that I can be useful to people who really need to know what's going on is that ASIL, as the former mentioned, ASL, who managed the health, access to the health system. How did it work before? How it worked before 2024 is what I'm saying. Not before Brexit, but before 2024. How it worked was that they, as I mentioned, looked at your carte d'identité, looked at your residence, and looked at your contracted work and looked at your tax payments, and looked at your IMPS. IMPS is the contribution you make to unemployment, whatever, from your employers. Okay, they look at that and they say, okay, she's working, she's resident here. Da, 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 da. And they allow you to use, they give you a card, you're issued, every Italian has one and every foreigner has one. Everyone in Italy has to have a carta sanitaria. You cannot go to the hospital without it. Your doctor has it on his system, your regular family doctor. And so every script you ask him for has that number stamped on it. Every time you go anywhere for an appointment at the hospital or checked into the hospital, that follows you. So they have all your information, who you are, all of it. They have it all. Okay? So that card everyone has. And so in 2024, what started to happen more and more for European Union people, because they're not only British European Union people in Italy, they are Germans, they are Finnish people, they're Swedish, there's all kinds of people, there's Swiss people who fall under the EEE. And so, yeah, these people started to be asked to pay a voluntary contribution to belong to the system, because if you were a foreigner in Italy and you weren't a long-time permanent resident, they brought in something called elective payments. So let's say you're an American, right? And you came along and you wanted to live in Italy and you crossed all your I's and dotted all your, the other way around, crossed your T's, dotted your I's. And they said to you, okay, you have to pay for a family of two, in other words, a couple. You have to pay, I don't know, depending on your age, I don't know how they calculate it, but let's say it was 600 a year. Okay, you elect to pay this amount in, and then you're covered by the servizi sanitari. You're covered on the health card, and your health card would state this and that. If you were a European Union person, your card looks slightly different, because on the back, what it said was you could use that anywhere in the European Union for an emergency treatment. This is crucial stuff. This is stuff that changes lives. And people just ignored it because they just thought, oh, we're in the European Union, who cares? I don't know what my card says. I just know that in an emergency, this article would be invoked and I would be fine. And then Brexit happened. Okay, but under Brexit, those of us who'd already been living here, we were covered, so we didn't worry. My card didn't change. It's always been the same. And it didn't change at all after I became an Italian citizen either, because it was always a full covered card. Okay, and it's still a full covered card. So if I had an accident in, I don't know, Germany, the immediate treatment would be covered under the European Union because I'm now a European Union citizen again. But even before I became a European Union citizen again, under a permanent residence agreement as a British person living in Italy, I was covered, okay, in the European Union. American people, people from outside the European Union, were not covered. They had something called elective payments, okay? And it's always been like that. And you paid on an annual basis, and depending on all the parameters, I don't know what they are. I'm not an actuary. I don't know the exact science of how they calculate the payments, but that's how it is. Okay. And that's how it always was. And then along came end of 23. I think the first rumblings came in November 23. They said, okay, you European Union people living in Italy, in other words, mostly British people and European Union people, you have got to pay to this figure of 2,000 euro came in next year. You're going to have to pay 2,000 euro. And everyone went ballistic, including me, because I was helping people and telling them what they needed to do. And this 2,000 thing popped out of the woodwork. And initially, the feeling was that this person to whom it was asked of perhaps had got something wrong. Maybe they didn't understand because they didn't speak Italian. So maybe the 2,000 euro wasn't required. We didn't know. We were wondering. No, it was. When these things pop up, it's always because they're being implemented. And so the news came that as of 2024, which we are now in, it could be also asked of European Union people. In other words, Germans, Spanish people, whatever, real European Union people, not ex European Union people like the Brits, could be asked for this payment, this payment to cover you. And of course, if you're not a permanent resident under the old system, and if you're not an Italian citizen, you have to renew this every year. It's a annually renewable thing, and they calculate, have you worked, have you contributed. So this idea of free medical in Europe that Americans always propose and people talk about all the time, free medical, it's fine for you, you get free medical. It's not free. We pay a fortune in tax to have it. And secondly, it's good. It's a lot better than many countries. I'm not knocking it in any way. I'm happy to have it. But you also pay a ticket. So let's say you're going to have an x-ray, you need your foot x-rayed, you need a visit with whatever, you pay a ticket. You go to the hospital to have any test done or whatever, you pay a ticket, which is a sort of one-time payment for that particular test or that particular thing you're having done. It has a coding and you pay one. It could be €5, it could be €10, it could be €65, it could be whatever. And that little ticket is paid into the state system, and everybody has that. The people who are exempt from that, who are people who are registered unemployed, registered handicapped without resources to funds, and they get a special contract that's like an exemption that's also renewed annually. So they could be exempt from that little ticket that they have to pay each time they go to the hospital or have a test. But the rest of the population, including Italians, all pay that little ticket. So I'm explaining in detail to you the health system because that's the only way to tell you how it works and what has happened with this 2,000 euro worry. Okay. So let's say you're in that bucket. Let's say you've heard or you're imagining that you're going to hear that you've got to pay this 2,000 euro for your 2024 coverage in Italy. You may be here on, I don't know, an elective visa. You may be here on another reason because you came after that settlement date, or you're a European Union person who's been living here forever, and you now hear that you have to pay this 2,000. Apparently, various groups have written to the European Union stating this is not constitutional. Various lawyers and legal people, much more au fait with the law than me, are saying it's not part of the European Union conditions. It's not right. It's not going to happen. It's never going to happen because it contradicts, and more than contradicts, it contravenes. That's even a stronger word, I think. It contravenes the agreement that European Union people will be treated as European Union people anywhere in the European Union, including those who came here under the European Union and were already settled. No, apparently it's going to happen. And Italy, as is often the case, as was the case with the Carta Soggiorno, which wasn't supposed to be obligatory and became obligatory because you couldn't do anything without it. Apparently it's happening, and people are really up in arms. There are people that have written to the UK government to try and get some movement. They have written to the European Union. They've written to all the European Union rights organizations that exist, to, or whatever, to the consulates, to everywhere. And the question is, we don't know. We don't know yet. We're asking Parliament. We're asking the Italian government. We don't have an answer. But the latest answer, and I'm here to tell you this, you heard it first here, is that they are probably enacting it, yes, and that it has been left up to not the Italian government, not the European Union, not any other body, but the particular ASIL in that province, in that district. Now, we all know, or maybe you don't, I do, I live here, that from different region to different region, from different province to different province in Italy, things are done differently, they work differently. There is no one solid, absolute rule that everything will be done in the same way. I covered this in the last video. As I said up there, I will give you Bureaucracy 101 in Italy. You can go and watch it. I'll put it up there. And I cover this in there. Every comune has their own little way of interpreting this law. They maybe have to ratify it. They have to ask Milan. That takes time. Then it has to go back to Rome, and they say, is this right? What should we be doing? What should we be asking for? So at this moment in time, they have left it up to the particular ASL in the community in which you fall under. So let's say you fall under Milan, they're going to have one way that they apply it, and they get to decide. I don't know. It works. For example, I've always lived in Lombardia, and my card on it, my Servizi Sanitari card, says Lombardia. Okay? That's the region that governs what I do with the health. So I could move within Lombardia to 50 different towns. I'd still be under Lombardia region, their way of interpreting what your rights are, what you can do in Lombardia, which things govern you. If you were living in Rome, you'd have one that, stated that, Lazio region, for example. So there is no one answer. It is now and this is deeply frustrating for many people, because it's really up to the ASL in your town, in your region, as to what they do with you, whether they ask you for this 2,000, which many people don't have. I mean, it's fine if you have the 2,000, I guess. You say, well, it's better than not having any cover. I'll just do it. But there are people who can't just come up with 2,000 and maybe have tests pending. Urgent test pending. Anyway, so that is the deal. And so that is one right that has been stood all over. Another right that I'm going to cover here, and this is very tender with lots of people, and please don't shoot me, I'm only the piano player. So these subjects are often avoided on YouTube. People talk about all the glories of living in Italy, the lovely cappuccino, the wine, and sitting on a beautiful bay and going up and down the Amalfi Coast. There's a million vlogs all talking about this, encouraging people to come and have the same lifestyle because they get hundreds of views, and the YouTube algorithm loves them because they get all these views and comments and likes, unlike me, who's just trying to put some truth out there and in the most positive way I possibly can. So, yeah, these subjects are tender, they are touchy, they make people extremely angry. When you deprive people of their rights or you change the rights or the legislation, people get extremely agitated, and sometimes some of that anger spills onto you. So please, I'm simply trying to help. Okay, if your situation turns out to be different and what I've said doesn't work for you, that's super. I'm thrilled for you. I'm just trying to help those who are trying to make sense. So please, as I say, please do like the video. Please do subscribe because I'm actually putting this information out for you guys. Great. Who need it. Okay, another thing, and the reason this is very tender is the work situation in Italy has changed phenomenally since Brexit. The majority of people who came here from Britain before Brexit came to teach English or didn't come to teach English. They maybe came with a partner who came on an international contract for a company that's international and worked here. And as the wife, they did a temporary job as a teacher, maybe just in the morning or maybe limited hours, and it worked beautifully. And it has worked for many years. Other people came as single people and struggled just to make a living, to buy, to rent a flat and to buy the things they need to live here on that one little small salary with very little rights on these very temporary contracts. But, you know, their work records spoke for themselves, therefore they had health care, they could live here, and life wasn't too bad. I mean, if you could eke out a living on this very small salary, which, by the way, for a single person has become completely impossible. I'm just telling you that right from the beginning. It's just really, really hard. And getting a permanent contract from a school, which, by the way, people who YouTube about Italy, yeah, you could just go and teach English, get a contract from a school. You can't. It's incredibly difficult. And it's been made even more difficult by Brexit. So what happened before Brexit was that every year, an amount of English people came into Italy without any permesso needed, without anything needed. They could come here, find a job. Oh, yes, you need a job. Okay, where's your permesso? Okay, I'm going to toddle down to the office. They're going to give me a carta d'identità. They're going to give me my tax number, and I'm going to register as resident in Italy and get a permesso for 1 year, and then you renewed it for another year. So it could all be done. Okay, could all be done legally. It could all be done. No problem. And those contracts were normally 1 year, maybe renewable, generally not. They expired after 1 year. But nevertheless, we ground on. Occasionally, in some unicorn situation, a long-term English teacher from Britain in Italy would get what they call di ruolo, which is that you are indeterminati, the most beautiful word in the Italian vocabulary, which means indeterminate. That means that your contract is not definable. It doesn't define it's 1 year, 2 year. It's indeterminate. In other words, it just goes on, and it's a permanent contract. And to get one of those is pretty much like hen's teeth. If you can find one, and I know somebody's going to write in, hopefully they do, so we can engage with them and say, yes, but I got a permanent contract to teach and I was lucky. Great. I'm thrilled for you. Okay. But what's happened since, and this is where I come back to what happened in England to the European Union people, there were about close 500,000. They don't know the exact figure. They quote between 600,000 and that kind of figure of young Italians living in London, living in UK, and jumping back and forth between their parents' home in Italy and England, working as waiters, working as Italian coaches, working as whatever they could find to do with no limitations. They didn't need to register like we had to register. They just had to get a tax number. They didn't have to prove anything. They got the NHS service as part of the European Union. They were European Union people, and European Union covered them, obviously. What happened at Brexit, they were then asked, are you going to register for settlement? Because there's a cutoff date, and that cutoff date was 2 years, and it ended in 20, and that's what happened, 2020. And so those young Italians who now had to choose, are you going to permanently reside in England, and that's your tax country, or you're going to go back to Italy, and that's your tax country and your permanent residence? They flocked home because they didn't want to be cut off from their families that they were seeing every second weekend. And so they all came home to a country that has 0 jobs, that already had a massive unemployment problem, which is why they went to London in the first place and why they studied English in the first place, giving all those British teachers work in Italy. And they all came back, most of them. Some of them stayed, some of them applied for settlement, but the majority came back to Italy and fell back into Italian life, but they didn't have a job. They didn't have a job. And guess what job they all got? Teaching English, because now they considered themselves mother tongue teachers. I know this is going to cause a lot of debate. I know this is going to cause discussion. I'm just stating facts. I have taught in schools, and just about everybody claims to be mother tongue, and most of them, mother tongue, as far as I'm concerned, is not where you're born. It is where you had your schooling and your first language. And so that's a mother tongue English person. Anyway, most of them had 2 years in Leeds, or they lived, they'll tell you, I lived for 4 months in London, therefore I'm a mother tongue. And that's what's happened. So these schools that used to open their doors to new British people to come here and teach English or work in some kind of tutoring role, that's not going to happen anymore. Now, if you want to apply for a job in any of these schools, you need to be a European Union citizen. And they openly tell you, are you a European Union citizen? No, I'm not, because Brexit is out. Oh, I'm sorry, we can't offer you a position. And if you say, could you please help me with my visa? No, I'm sorry, we can't, because we have to consider European Union. It's only open to European Union. So this is a huge discrimination that's happened, and there's nothing anybody can do about it. There are various people on various groups. I go back to the Facebook groups because you can't avoid them. They are there, that know there's a workaround. And the reason that these schools say we can't do it, we can't help you, even if you've already been working for us, we can't do it. We can't continue your contract. We can't give you a permanent contract because you're not European Union. And the workaround is said to be, I don't know, 3 zeros, because everything is systemized on the system. So when this contract comes up and they say, which is the code, if you're not European Union code and you're not, you have to state which nation you're from. Apparently there's a workaround, but schools don't want to break the law for this. Why should they? I mean, they have Italians willing to teach English, dying to teach English. So why should they break the rule and make this exception for a British person who was here pre-Brexit and give them a contract when it clearly states that it's only for European Union people? There are some people who found a workaround, I'm not saying, but the fact is that the rights of British people in Italy one with the new 2024 payment into the Servizi Sanitari, the health system, which was never the case. That is one way that there has been a breach. And the other way is that these people can no longer get a job or continue their job, even worse, in Italy. There are ways that maybe your company, if you're transferred there and you're working for an international company, they handle your visa. That's another story. That is a tiny slither of the amount of people. Most people I know are teaching English and have been teaching English, and many of them have gone back. So if you want to know why people have left Italy, why they've got disillusioned, why some people are leaving Italy, I'm still here. I'm very lucky to be here. I'm not bleating about Italy. I'm not being negative about Italy at all. I'm simply telling you to help people who are struggling with this. If you look at my video before this, why people are leaving Italy, I cover some of the reasons in there. One of them could be a job situation. Another could be that they suddenly ask for these payments that they don't have, and they have no reason, and they go back to England because or to UK in general, not always England, maybe Scotland, maybe Wales, maybe Northern Ireland, where they came from. So we've covered an hour. Time flies when you're having fun. So I hope this has been useful. Those of you who maybe really want to comment, want to ask a question, I ask you, please leave me a comment. It helps me a lot. Helps YouTube suggest this to other people so that they could also find out. Thank you for joining me again. I hope it's received well. As I say, please, I'm just trying to be helpful. These are not my opinions. I'm not stating opinions here. I'm simply telling you how it's worked and what I've discovered along the way for the people I try to help who find themselves in these terrible situations with families being split up and really very stressful situations. So I'll see you on the next one. Remember, on Sunday, we will do another update. The next one I'm going to cover is maybe other reasons why people prefer the South and the North, and some new towns in the South. So we'll do some lovely Italy content again. And if you're going through an elective visa, you can check my last broadcast. There's going to be a specific elective visa coming up, an edition coming up. So join me again. I'm going to say good night now. See you on the next one. Please leave me a comment. Please share this with your friends. Share it on your Facebook group. Share it wherever you can. See you on the next one. Bye for now. Take care. From Italy.